Hello everybody and welcome to my review of BattleBots 2020 episode 7. On average a pretty good episode actually compared to previous episodes that we've had. This one was actually quite up there, it was very good. In my absence last week I've begun working on two very special videos that you guys voted for, and they will be coming soon, but for now let's get into the fights of this episode. Before we do that, looking at the fight card for this episode, I began to notice something very strange, and that is that BattleBots is really beginning to mix around the order of some of the fights in the order that they were filmed in. For example, Beta versus Rusty was Beta's very first fight. I do not see the sense in airing Beta versus Rusty after Beta versus Rotator, even though we know that Beta versus Rusty came before Beta versus Rotator. That means that Beta beats Rusty. Like, I know that's a bit of a predictable fight anyway, no offense to Rusty, but the order in which BattleBots is releasing things and releasing pictures of fights that happen later on in the season, it's like, it's starting to spoil fights for me, because it's possible to work out, just because of the nature of BattleBots, what happens in a certain fight and the result of it, because, for example, Beta fighting Rusty, if it's going to get put up against Rotator, then it probably ends up beating Rusty, do you know what I mean? So, like, BattleBots, I think, needs to slow it down with the releasing of the information, because it's starting to spoil fights that don't need to be spoiled. Like, there's nothing wrong with raising the hype and stuff like that, but if you're revealing too much information, then some of the fights are going to become a bit too predictable. That's just something I've noticed anyway. On to our first fight, Axe Backwards versus Captain Shredderator. Now, in my opinion, this was the best fight of the night. And I can't believe I'm saying that. If you'd asked me 2 episodes ago, what do you think about Captain Shredderator versus Axe Backwards? What do you think that's going to be? I would have fallen asleep while you're explaining the fight. That does not sound like an interesting fight to me. Both of these robots have shown glimmers of hope, but season after season they just fail. So I've lost all hope in both robots at this point, because they always seem to have reliability issues and they never ever really change. So when I saw them drawn up against each other in a fight, I was like, oh my god, who's gonna die the first? But that was not the case at all. Like, Axe Backwards went in with this wedge thing, which ended up in the robot being welded together, both sides of the robot. And I think that might have actually helped them kind of hold the robot together, because if you remember, against robots like Deep Six, Axe Backwards gets split in half really easily. But I feel like once they've welded the robot together, it's just got an extra kind of element of secureness, and it didn't get torn apart immediately against Shredderator. Likewise, I don't know what Shredderator did, but this season they've been a lot more reliable. And it's really great to see. This fight was just backwards and forwards, Shredderator flying all over the place, Axe Backwards getting thrown across the arena. It was backwards and forth. It was great to watch both of these robots, and people have given up hope on these robots. They're like, oh, they need to start thinking about bringing new design ideas to the board. I think if both of these robots keep up performances like this, I believe they've both got one fight left. I could see them making the top 30. I could see Shredderator making the top 32 at this point, because it's beaten Axe Backwards in a really good fight. If they get another victory, then that's them into the tournament for me. I think they've got a fight card left anyway. If they haven't, then that's a bit sad. As for Axe Backwards, I think it's a little bit too late for them, because of course they did pick up the loss earlier on in the season to Malice, but still a really impressive showing, and they've justified their design. Like, they've proven that it can work. They just need to keep that wedge formation. It's really good. I really like it. So great fight from both of those robots. Then we had Copperhead versus P1, and if I'm honest, I like Copperhead, but this fight, there's not a lot to say about it. P1 rushed out into the middle of the box. Copperhead came in, delivered such a big hit that it shoved P1's wedge backwards into its robot. Like, the chances of that happening are really low, but just that impact shoved P1's whole wedge setup further back into the robot, and it started to hit motors and batteries and stuff, and eventually something rolled out of P1. So P1 after that point was pretty much dead. It did have a bit of mobility afterwards, but it wouldn't have lasted the fight even if Copperhead hadn't hit it again. So just that one hit from Copperhead, once again Copperhead showing that it can dish out really big hits. Its opponents haven't been the best at putting up fights against it, and it's yet to be challenged, I feel, in this season, but it dishes out really powerful hits. That it was able to shove P1's wedge so far back into the robot that it actually stopped working. As for P1, they did pick up an untelevised win against Kronos, if I remember correctly. So if they win again, then they'll have a chance at joining Cophead in the bracket, because Cophead has absolutely made it into the bracket. I don't care what anyone says, it absolutely has. So yeah, this fight was very quick. Two good solid hits though, so I'm actually okay with that. And then we moved on to Beta versus Rusty, and even if Beta's hammer hadn't been working, I feel like it still would have won this fight, because Rusty was having a lot of drive issues. It's normally a very quick robot. It kept getting stuck on things with his little wedgelets. And yeah, so generally I feel that Rusty couldn't out-wedge Beta, and Beta just had the superior drive. I think he had the superior everything in this fight, but Beta is a very, very expensive robot, so I'm not really surprised. The thing about Beta is that it didn't fire its hammer until it completely had Rusty almost dead in the corner, and that is worrying to me. I feel like they're going to go throughout this competition. I have this horrible feeling that Beta's going to go throughout this whole competition, and in every single fight, it's not going to fire its hammer at its opponent until its opponent is like pinned in the corner, and that is going to that is going to be Beta's downfall. Like, if you remember in Season 2, it would fire the hammer whenever it got the chance, and it was really impressive to watch. Now they're just too safe, and it's a bit annoying. It's a bit annoying, because I really want to see them squash things with the hammer again, like it did to Rusty's back. It squashed it like a tin can. I'm not sure what Rusty's back is actually made out of, but it got crushed by Beta. It got crushed. So Beta's hammer has some power. It is very powerful, but they need to use it. Then we had Hypeshock versus Mammoth, and Hypeshock has of course sorted out their teething issues, as was evident from this fight. Mammoth went into this fight without their hinged wedgelets that they used against, I think it was Who last year, and Foxtrot as well. You know those like triangular wedgelets that he used? It didn't use them in this fight. It just had these like long sticks, which means that it couldn't get underneath Hypershock and flip it over. It was just pushing against Hypershock. And so Hypershock, all it had to do was turn on the weapon and essentially slit Mammoth's weapon chain and slit the pipes that construct Mammoth, and like that was it. Mammoth needs something to get underneath its opponent so it can actually lift them, rather than just pushing against them, because it's just pushing itself backwards. And that's what happened here. It pushed itself backwards into the wall. It got flipped over. Hypershock came in, slit the weapon chain, and that was it. Well, that was almost it. The driver of Mammoth, his name escapes me, asked for Hypershock to hit him again and self-fry him, but he said, not the battery box, not the battery box. Hypershock hit the battery box and set Mammoth on fire. And that is concerning. That is very concerning, because apparently Mammoth does not have any spare batteries. I would hope that other competitors could actually lend them a hand there and like sell them some batteries or something. In fact, Hypershock has been known to do that in the past, but still, Hypershock went in and just finished off Mammoth's last batteries. That like no more spares. So that's just it. And so Mammoth is in trouble for the rest of the season, I feel, if they take another hit to the battery box. Good showing from Hypershock there. Good to see that they've got their weapon up and running. Their drive issues look sorted out as well. So good work from Hypershock. Good work from Hypershock. So we move on to Sub-Zero versus Sporkanok. Another fight that confused me, because Sub-Zero has just beaten Grabot. And Grabot isn't a very competitive robot. And Sporkanok has been struggling this season. It did lose to Rusty. It's been struggling this season. So what did the selection committee do? They put Sub-Zero, who needs a win against like a decent opponent in order to prove that it's worthy of the top 32, against Sporkanok, who is struggling. Right, Sporkanok needs like an easy matchup so they can get their robot running properly before being yeeted across the arena like a bag of crisps. I keep using that simile, but it's what happened. It's what happened. Sub-Zero just got straight underneath, threw Sporkanok through the air, just repeatedly kept throwing it through the air. Look, it looked like they were trying to get out of the arena, and they almost did at one point. And then Sub-Zero's pneumatics broke. They were still working, but they broke. So like the bungee broke, or the ram came out of place or something. Sub-Zero's flipper could still fire, but it was firing more than it, like the arc was bigger than it should have been. It's a bit difficult to explain. The whole thing came out, but it was still working anyway. In fact, I think it worked better when the pneumatic system was all over the place, which is quite amusing. Anyway, they almost got Sporkanok out of the arena, but not quite. So Sub-Zero moves to 2-1. 2 wins against fairly weak opponents in Grabot and Sporkinok, so they've made the top 32, I think, but they're not going to be seeded very highly for that. As for Sporkinok, it's a shame. It's a shame. It's a promising design, but it's had a loss to Rusty and a loss to Sub-Zero. I don't think it's going to get another win, to be honest, because I'm not sure. It's just been having a lot of issues. Like, the weapon hasn't worked at all. The drive isn't really working, and so Sporkinok, obviously it's a new robot, but I don't think it's going to do very well this season, which is unfortunate. Moving on, we have Balespear versus Tracer, and I think that this might actually be one of Balespear's first televised fight cards. So, yeah, in the past it's been mostly just unaired fights for Balespear, but today actually got to show what it can do against Tracer, and Tracer is in trouble going into this fight. They've lost to Ribot by being flipped over, and apparently they've also lost to Hijinks in an unaired fight. That is public knowledge now. It's on the wiki, okay. But they've lost to Hijinks as well in an unaired fight, and so they're 0-2 now. They need this win against Balespear, and to be honest, again, even if Tracer's weapon wasn't working, I don't see Balespear beating Tracer. Purely because of the shape of Tracer and the fact that it's so well armoured and densely packed that Balespear's spear could not actually penetrate it and do damage. Balespear needs something like Chomp, which it has lots of weak spots to attack, for that spear to actually do damage, but against Tracer, which is armoured like a tank, I don't see Balespear actually doing any damage whatsoever. Tracer's minibot, Needle, actually helped them win this fight by pinning Balespear like it's supposed to do, and then Tracer charging up the weapon, which takes a bit of a long time to spin up, I'll admit, and then coming in for the kill against Balespear. It wasn't the most dramatic of hits. It ripped a few parts off, but it didn't split Balespear. It didn't damage any wheels or anything. So Tracer did win, and it did get a pretty dominant win. However, that weapon does not seem as powerful as I hoped it would be. It's a really well-built robot, and believe me, I want to see it do well. But that weapon seems a bit stop-start, a bit like Hypershocks, you know. Not the most powerful, but still pretty powerful if it works properly. As for Balespear, no offense to the team, I love Balespear, but I don't think it's going to make the top 32. I believe this is its first fight card. I can't remember it fighting anything else. If it has, then I've got the memory of a goldfish, but, you know, I don't see Balespear making the top 32, unfortunately. It just doesn't seem like it could compete against the meta of vertical spinners. There's a lot of weak points to attack on the robot, so I don't think Balespear is actually going to make the top 32, which is very sad. As for Tracer, I don't know, because it seems like a lot of 1 and 2 robots might actually have a chance of making it into the top 32, just because of how small the field is this season and how large the top 32 bracket kind of... It's more than half the field is going to make it in, so undoubtedly some 1 and 2 robots are going to make it in, and I think Tracer is going to be one of those robots, so Tracer could get like a 31st or 32nd seed or something, which is really cool. Moving on to the main event, and this fight was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I thought that Whiplash was just going to come out of the gate and just outdrive Gruff and just win the fight like that, just keep flipping it over, maybe pin it in the corner a few times, but that's not what happened. Gruff put up a much better fight than I thought it was. I definitely underestimated the speed of Gruff and the agility of it. It's because it's such a long robot, and I feel like Whiplash had a lot of points to attack on the side of it because it was so long. But that wasn't the case at all. Gruff put up a really, really good fight. First of all, they were throwing flames in the face of Whiplash and just absolutely trying to burn it to shreds, and doing a really good job at keeping Whiplash at bay until Whiplash got underneath, and with the spinning disc actually managed to damage one of the fuel tanks, it seems, for the flamethrowers. I don't know what Gruff's base is actually made out of, the base plate. It looks like plastic, because Whiplash was able to go straight through it and hit whatever was underneath it, and that immediately cut off Gruff's flamethrowers. They weren't really working after that, or they ran out of fuel, one of the two. But after that, Gruff was trying to flip Whiplash over. Whiplash was kind of winning that battle and just throwing all across the arena and upside down and whatnot. And then Gruff actually, like, it came together with Whiplash and the lifters got connected, and Whiplash was trying to lift Gruff's lifter upwards, and Gruff's lifter was pushing Whiplash's lifter downwards, and then Gruff started to smoke. So I think that kind of put too much stress on the weapon motor of Gruff and actually began to make it smoke. Either way, Whiplash was able to pick up the win. It was a win that was needed against Gruff, which is a very good robot, very competent robot, and Whiplash has picked up the win after their disaster against Sawblaze earlier on in the season. They've managed to bounce back very well from that. Gruff, of course, has just come from beating Hypershock and barbecuing Hypershock, and it's lost to Whiplash now. So it's a 1-on-1. Anything could happen. It lost while putting on a good fight. So like Tracer, it might be one of those robots that goes 1 and 2 and still manages to make it into the top 32. Both of these robots put on a really good show, and it was actually one of the best main events of the season. Overall, this episode was really good. By Season 5 standards. If you'd shown me this episode in 2019, I would have called it quite mediocre, but just because of the standard, some of the fights that we've been having in 2020, this was one of the better episodes. So, great job to all of the teams who competed. There was not one single robot that disappointed me. All of them put up pretty good fights. So, very well done. Very well done to all of the BattleBots team and all of the BattleBots teams that competed in the show. So, it was really good episode. Thank you all very much for watching and for voting on the poll, of course, as well. Both of those videos will be coming soon. So, thank you very much and good night.